Memory Dump by John Triptych. Leaning by the front door, Tyrell lit up another cigarette. Dusk was fast approaching, but he kept his cool. He'd been waiting years for this one moment, and now that it was happening, he felt a warmth of calm determination cascading along his back. Vengeance at last. The rapidly darkening skyline over Los Angeles gradually turned from a smoky gray overcast into curtains of mottled crimson. Fires continued to burn everywhere, with hardly anyone willing and able to put them out. He'd done his research and read a forest of articles predicting what would happen. Yet when it finally did occur, it was never quite what the experts had predicted. They called it the Big One. The San Andreas Fault ran down nearly the entire length of California, and earthquakes were a constant occurrence whenever the tectonic plates needed to let out some steam. Any Angelino would tell you it was just a matter of time till it happened again. The last big one occurred in 1906, more than a century before, and it decimated San Francisco, completely flattening the entire city just like a pancake. And yet, even though everybody knew the big one was coming and were constantly being reminded of it, when the massive earthquake finally struck, most people remained unprepared. Hardly anyone had stocked up on food, water, and medications, since most were living day to day, totally dependent on their next paycheck. Most people didn't bother to have batteries and flashlights on the ready. Decades of complacency were all part of human nature, ingraining a kind of lethargic fatality to its core. Most thought the authorities had it all figured out well in advance, and if anything bad really happened, they would be taken care of. But in the end, it turned out to be the blind leading the blind, due to the momentous events that followed. 4 days ago, a magnitude 8.2 quake erupted along the entire fault line, from the north coast and all the way down to the Coachella Valley. San Francisco took a huge brunt of it, same as before, but only this time the devastation expanded southwards down to San Bernardino and Palm Springs. Smaller quakes happened not long after, reverberating along the other minor fault lines across the city. The latest reports that had been passed on by amateur radio crews indicated deaths in the low thousands and growing by the minute. The power grid had already buckled and tripped, plunging much of the city into darkness. Faucets ran dry, and swimming pools became desert oases. While most dwellings remained intact due to strict building codes, many were now unusable. As the days wore on, starvation and thirst set in, and the desperate began looting. The Santa Ana winds blowing into the city made things even worse, and unchecked wildfires merely added to the lethal carnage. And if that wasn't enough, something even larger than the big one happened a few days later, while California was still reeling from the multitude of aftershocks caused by San Andreas. Nature's fury unleashed another earthquake, and this one was even more devastating. Just north of San Andreas lay another fault line. This one was called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and it stretched from Cape Mendocino all the way up the Pacific Northwest until it reached Vancouver. Less than 2 days after San Andreas had done its bloody work, the southern portion of the Cascadia Zone suddenly gave way, no doubt affected by its angry sibling to the south. The resulting new earthquake was rumored to measure at 9.2 on the Richter scale, making it even more powerful than the big one that had just occurred. And if that wasn't enough, a monster tsunami struck the devastated coastlines of Oregon and Washington state a few hours later. Both FEMA and the state authorities had been preparing for a large earthquake, yet with the entire west coast having been obliterated by not one, but 2 huge quakes and a tsunami to boot, meant they were now overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it. Help would eventually come, but California would have to cope mostly on their own for the time being. Tyrell finished his cigarette and strolled back inside the house. Unlike most others, he'd been waiting for this. He'd been patiently biding his time, and now he needed to take advantage of it. The thirst for revenge was an open wound that festered for years, and he wanted to stick it to the man, not just for his own peace of mind, but for the memory of his brother too. Even though Jamal was his identical twin, he couldn't have been more different in personality. Tyrell was lean, bookish, and a loner, while the more muscular Jamal was outgoing and athletic. Jamal had become captain of the high school football team, and Tyrell thought his brother might even make it to the NFL someday. Alas, it was not to be. Dropping out of college, Jamal fell in with the wrong crowd. Tyrell heard about his twin brother dealing, but he closed his mind off, focusing on his own studies. It didn't matter what they said about Jamal. Tyrell always believed his brother would overcome any adversity and eventually straighten his life out. Then came that horrible day when Tyrell picked up his smartphone and heard his mother's anguished wailing. The cops showed up when Jamal and his girlfriend had just parked in front of their house. Jamal was wanted on an arrest warrant after skipping out on bail. When the cop confronted him, Jamal had his hands up. He was unarmed, the gun still in the car seat. And yet the cop opened fire anyway, and his brother died on the spot. Tyrell had seen the dashcam video, and it was clearly an execution. He attended the rallies when the DA declined to press charges, and nothing came out of it. Tyrell's mother died a few months later, sick and broken. Over the next few years, Tyrell became a lost soul. He'd thought about killing himself, until he read an article about cryptocurrencies and all the money that could be made from stealing them. The words gave him purpose, and he pivoted his agile mind into a new kind of crusade. Tyrell participated in a number of black hat projects in the dark web, and he began to develop a reputation. He got an unexpected boost when an anonymous donor began funding his schemes, and Tyrell formulated a plan to land the biggest fish of them all. It would take an enormous amount of patience and lots of luck, but if he could pull it off, he'd end up sunning himself on his own private island someday. He had the right plan, and the means to pull it off. The only other thing he needed was a miracle, and that too happened when the big one finally occurred. God was on his side. He had to be. Why else would all this come about, just like he knew it would? Inside one of the bedrooms was an encrypted CB radio, manned by his cousin, Alonzo. With the city's power cut off and cell sites down, vintage technology accrued a new life of its own. Alonzo used to be a runner for his twin brother, and had been in and out of prison until Tyrell took the younger man under his wing. Alonzo glanced in his direction. "I ain't heard nothing yet. You sure it's gonna happen tonight?" Tyrell nodded. "Be cool and just wait, brother." They engaged in small talk for about 20 minutes before the speaker started squawking. Alonzo diligently wrote the code down before handing it over. Tyrell read it before he used his lighter to burn the paper. "You know what you need to do. Can I count on you?" "Hey, you know me. I got this." They shook hands before Tyrell went over to the garage and started up a nondescript van and drove it out of the neighborhood. He'd been updating his maps since the first day, and navigating the vehicle around the impassable areas was going to take some time. Passing through Lenox and into Hawthorne, he carefully made his way through the major choke points. The collapsed freeway overpasses reminded him of children's toy blocks that had been trampled by giant toddlers, and he had to pull out his pistol and wave it around when he drove through a checkpoint manned by looters who tried to stop him. That was one thing he could count on. California having strict gun regulations meant anyone who had one right now would have the power. Despite most of the damage being centered towards the north, LA had turned into a hodgepodge of mini locales divided by hedgerows of wrecked freeways and clogged streets full of abandoned electric vehicles. Some areas were calm, while mobs periodically rampaged and pillaged in others. Even though the National Guard had been called up, it would take days for them to get organized. Most of the active military units were more concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, leaving much of California as the lesser priority. He found the man waiting for him near the edge of a burned-out commercial strip mall. Heavy-set with a blonde crew cut, he was known as Igor the Russian. Tyrell had heard of him only by reputation, and they'd exchanged brief greetings using encrypted chats before agreeing on the plan. The Russian nodded in slight greeting as he got into the van's front seat. "My car was stuck, so I thank you." Tyrell shook his hand before speeding off. "You got the mod chip all set and ready?" "I do." "Good. Then all we got to do now is plug and play." By the time they made it to northern Torrance, it was well past midnight. Tyrell didn't make use of the headlights, since there was enough illumination coming from the nearby fires of the oil depots. Stopping near the entrance of the compound, they were hardly surprised to find the immediate area abandoned, since there were no food stores of any kind nearby. The unlit billboard was titled CoinPro, and the large windowless square building was surrounded by a chain-linked fence. Both men took wire cutters from the back of the van and went to work, breaching the barrier within minutes. Upon reaching the entrance, they both pressed themselves against a shadowy alcove and paused. For 5 minutes they just waited patiently in the dark, watching for telltale signs of an alert. Popping noises of gunfire could be heard in the near distance, but nothing else. Igor finally gave the go-ahead, and they both used crowbars to breach the reinforced front door. The silent alarms were no doubt triggered, yet they knew the cops would never come since the security firm was offline. Moving past the receptionist area and into the server room, Tyrell could only marvel at the still-functioning diesel generators keeping much of the blockchain infrastructure intact. This was the heart of the crypto exchange, and he felt like a little virus about to infect it. Tyrell followed the bigger man, walking up to one of the server units. The Russian used a screwdriver to remove the outer casing before inserting a modified chip into the rack. With the authority node now compromised, Tyrell walked up to the administrator terminal and typed on the keyboard. The monitor screen flickered to life, and Tyrell began his hack. A cold boot attack consisted of using the computer's own RAM to gather up the private keys that users had inputted to access their accounts on the blockchain. Tyrell had written an application that could identify and decrypt the specific algorithms to extract the precious seed phrases, and in so doing allow him complete access to the client accounts without the outside networks becoming aware. Tyrell worked quickly, transferring and converting large sums of various cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens into different accounts. With the estimated hoard totaling in the billions, he drew out a hardware wallet that he designed himself and inserted it into the USB port, moving everything into an offline device that would be unrecoverable via remote means. Removing the wallet from the port, he stood up. "Okay, let's get out of here," and Tyrell stopped talking when he turned around. Igor was pointing a pistol at him. He realized right away that there was no honor among thieves. The Russian held out his left hand. "Give me the wallet and your passcode. Now." Tyrell gripped the device tightly. "How do I know you won't shoot me anyway, if I do all that, fool? You don't have a choice. If you don't give it to me on the count of 3, I shall kill you. 1, 2, 3. Tyrell nearly jumped when he heard the gunshots. By the time he'd recovered his wits, the Russian was lying on the ground, and he noticed his cousin standing over the dying man. He breathed a sigh of relief. "About time. I thought you'd never show." Alonzo made a sheepish shrug while holstering his own gun. "Sorry, homie. I got delayed because of all that trash in the streets." Tyrell's grin stretched from ear to ear. He'd collected around $10 billion worth of crypto, and laundering it would be a nightmare. But that would be a problem for another day. Now at long last his brother could rest in peace. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe for updates. Copyright 2025, John Triptych Publishing. All rights reserved. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, places, and events either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events and/or locales is entirely coincidental.